Okay, since it's 2 o'clock, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to our talk with Sally Mavor. We're really excited to be here. We're so lucky to have Sally's exhibit on display here at the Brickstore Museum in Kennebunk, and we're excited to talk to her today about her work. So as I welcome everyone in, I invite you to find the chat section at the bottom of the video. It's towards the middle. And you're welcome to type your questions in there. And I can read them at the end of the presentation, or you'll have a chance to unmute yourself and ask Sally. So for over 40 years, Sally has been creating three-dimensional hand-stitched artwork that ranges from precious to poignant to provocative. In addition to standalone pieces, her work is applied in many ways, including children's books, editorial illustration, and stop-motion animation. So I'm going to start off today by asking Sally some questions. So hi, Sally.
Hello.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you so much for putting together this Zoom talk. I've really been looking forward to meeting everyone and to sharing my artwork with you. And I also want to thank the Brickstore Museum for hosting my exhibit this summer. It's been extraordinary.
We love having you here. So to start off, your work is on display here at the Brickstore Museum. And for those that don't know, we're located in Kennebunk, Maine. And we've had people coming from as far as California to see your work. Would you tell us more about your connection with the museum and how you came to have your exhibit here, your retrospective exhibit?
Yes, now that is a story in itself. I was not familiar with the Brickstore Museum until a few years ago when I was contacted by, his name has just escaped me, but he's from the Illustration Institute in Peaks Isle, Maine. Scott Nash. Scott Nash is his name. And he had heard about my work. Because I, at that point, it was about 2018, 2019, I was doing some political work and more topical, and it got some press. And so he found out about it that way. And he was putting together an exhibit at the Brickstore Museum titled The Art of Cute. And this was, in his view, cute was an aesthetic that it was underappreciated. And he wanted to show all different aspects of the cute form. And he was looking for something that was in the sort of the little more edgy realm. And so he decided to include some of my work. And when I brought it up to bring it to the show, to the museum, I got to meet him and I got to meet the Brickstore Museum staff. And I saw what a wonderful, cute place it is. And after the exhibit, I heard from Leanne Hayden, who is the director, about how people had responded to my artwork. People came up to the desk and told them how much they enjoyed it. And I took that opportunity to ask Leanne point blank if she would be interested in having a solo show of my work. And she did not hesitate. She said yes. Yeah. And then here we are several years later with a show that spans all 4 galleries. I knew I could fill it. It was just a question of finding all the pieces and where they're located, where people live who have bought pieces years and years ago. So I searched and I found pieces that haven't been seen. I haven't seen for 30 years. So it's a real opportunity to get everything together so people can see the range of things that I've worked on from childhood to today.
I love that. We are wondering when you started creating with needle and thread. I've seen some of your really early stuff and your picture book here, which is really cool to look at.
Yes, in the exhibit is my picture book from age 8, and I have a photo in my PowerPoint of it as well. I have been making things my whole life. That's my earliest memories have to do with holding things in my hands and manipulating them. And I credit my mother with providing a home life where art was thought of as the most natural thing. It's part of why you get up in the morning. And she was an artist herself. So it was not an extra, it's just what you do. So she was always available to help me if I wanted to try something. She was always trying things, every craft imaginable. So I started sewing when I was quite young, and I made my own clothes, but I didn't really think of it as art. I was just making stuff,
Having fun.
doing crafts. And it wasn't until I was in art school that I began to see it as art, and made it my mission to present it in such a way that others also saw it as art. And that's taking me all these years to I feel that maybe I've made it, but I don't know. This whole craft art thing is a debate that will be going on way after I'm gone. So I'm just happy to have found something that is unique. I have my own way of expressing something, which is important to me. I've always been a nonconformist, and in a kind of a quiet way.
Yeah.
So I just feel really blessed to be able to do this.
I love it. And every piece I look at, leads into my next question. I think this must have taken you a long time. So I was wondering, what about hand embroidery that drew you into this labor-intensive form rather than like a conventional medium?
Yeah, well, that kind of evolved itself. In art school, I did all kinds of things more in the fine art realm, and I was a printmaking major for a while, and I loved to draw, but I always did things on the side with my hands, and especially with a needle and thread. And I had been making and selling things since I was about 10 years old. I've always had some kind of mass production going on. I love multiples. I love developing ideas and seeing where it goes. And that's been part of my life for as long as I can remember. So this is just a continuation of it. And the embroidery, there is really something about how it slows you down. And I found that I really need that to develop my ideas, because a lot of what I'm thinking is in my head as an image. I draw it on a piece of paper, black and white, and then it's translated into 3 dimensions with color later. And that all happens very slowly and methodically, and it's part of the process. I really need to think about what I'm doing, because I am trying things that I've never done before. I'm never sure how I'm going to make stuff. It just kind of, I let my hands lead me, and that takes time. I've found that drawing just doesn't satisfy it with me, or painting.
Yeah.
There's too much of a space between the pencil and my hand. I need to hold things. I need to manipulate them. I need to kind of sort of battle with them, with the materials in order to create something. And I've never have been good at following directions. So I've learned I'm
a great artist.
I'm self-taught. I just followed the standard diagrams in an embroidery book and figured out my own ways of doing something. And so that's why people ask me if I teach, and I didn't learn that way. So it's sort of a foreign concept to me.
Okay.
I will demonstrate, I'll sort of show on my blogs sort of how I've done something, but to pick it apart piece by piece, you do this, you do this, that to me just takes all the life out of it. It's I dread that, actually. So some people are really good at that, but for me, it just takes the magic away.
Yeah. I'm interested, and I'm sure lots of other people are. In a few minutes, we're going to show your video that is how you went about making the children's book, My Bed. What inspired you to take your art and make it and combine it with children's literature?
Well, I was an illustration major in art school because it was the only department that you could do whatever you wanted to, as long as it was narrative in nature. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, I could do that, but I never thought it would really happen. And it took until I had young children, and I had developed this way of working, which I called fabric relief, which you could be photographed and then printed as illustrations. So I could sort of see a way to do that, and I had to be ready to do it. And so it was partly being around children and falling in love with books that we'd get out of the library, and my sense of confidence that I could actually do it.
Okay. I have 3 children, and they love coming in and seeing your artwork. They keep asking to come into the museum for it. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'll save time at the end so people can ask their own questions. But what are you trying to achieve with your art, and how does that affect the process?
Well, I think that I am trying to communicate with an audience in a visceral way, which I believe most artists are, that's their aim, more through the heart than through the head. And so I create these little worlds that people can immerse themselves in, and it conjures up all kinds of memories and feelings. People are profoundly affected by what I do, I have learned. And so I feel real responsibility to sort of keep it up and to provide this because of the feedback I get.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, and another thing that I want to do with my art is to inspire others to find their thing, their way of expressing them, the uniqueness in them. And it doesn't have to be with embroidery or sewing, but there's certain ways that work better than others. So for that purpose, and I think exploring and trying different things is a good way of seeing what works for you, what gives you satisfaction, what comes naturally. I mean, so much of our making things or learning a skill involves struggle.
Yeah.
And I think that learning things is hard. But if you can get to a point where it's no longer a struggle and it becomes a personal expression, that's really what you're after, and it can be just life-changing. So I'd like to inspire others to find their way.
I believe you are doing that. We love your work. I'm going to ask now, Cynthia, if you'll go ahead and play the Making My Bed video for everybody. And
My bed is like peeking into a cozy miniature world with characters, props, and scenery all stitched by hand. With utmost care, the renowned fiber artist Salley Mavor has created a picture book that takes you on an international journey into the homes of children around the world. On each spread, she captures the spirit of a different place and a different way of life in intricate detail. These are no ordinary illustrations. Salley creates her pictures with fabric, beads, and thousands of stitches, creating artwork that brings these children to life, while illuminating the universal theme of children sleeping safely in their beds. Let me show you what went into making my bed. Salley Mavor's artwork is indeed unique. She has spent decades experimenting with the needle and thread, developing ways of embroidering, wrapping, and binding different materials together to create a visual narrative. And it should be noted that every scene and every stitch of the book was done entirely by hand. So I asked Salley where her very unusual personal artistic expression came from.
Even as a young child, drawing with crayons was never enough. I felt that my pictures were not finished until something real was added, either glued or stapled or sewn to the paper. So what I make today and how I do it comes from this same need to find my own way of translating what I imagine into something tangible to share.
In the 1970s, when Salley was an illustration student at the Rhode Island School of Design, she was encouraged to find her own artistic voice outside the two-dimensional mediums common for most illustrators and to create work in 3 dimensions. With this kind of permission from her teachers, she felt free to access her younger self and rediscover the joy of making things with her hands.
For me, it's all about the tactile experience. Holding and manipulating materials in my hands is where the magic happens.
Salley Mavor has built a career in children's books with her own brand of miniature make-believe. Her desire has always been to make art that connects with people in an intimate way. A few years ago, an editor approached Salley about illustrating Rebecca Bond's manuscript for my bed, thinking that her artwork would be a good match. Because Salley's working methods are so labor-intensive, agreeing to illustrate a new book is a huge commitment. I asked Salley why this book made her say yes.
When I read Rebecca's poem, I imagined scenes jam-packed with patterns and textures, all infused with a warm sense of home. What excited me most was the international aspect of the book.
And then what?
To begin, I studied lots of photos of children and houses and buildings and landscapes from different regions of the world. And using those as reference, I drew simple thumbnail sketches. Then I enlarged the drawings to full size and used those as guidelines for the finished artwork. Even before threading the first needle, I spent a lot of time going over in my head how to make all of the major parts so that they would come together in the end. All of the details and color choices came later as I started constructing the pieces. My favorite material is wool felt because it's sturdy and versatile and the cut edges don't fray. For this book, I also picked unusual fabrics, such as 100-year-old age-stained linen that was passed down from my grandmother. It turned out to be the perfect texture for a Japanese tatami mat. Beads are great for adding a 3-dimensional whimsical touch. With so many to choose from, the selection process was like an audition for bit parts in a play. Besides fabric and thread, I used a lot of wire. I've spent my whole life collecting interesting small treasures, from bits of wood to metal findings. When I see objects with special features that I think will convincingly replicate something in miniature scale, I put them aside, and sometimes they make it into my artwork. I first got to know the children in the book when I painted their faces on wooden beads. As I continued to make their bodies and sew their clothing, I fell in love with them. Then it didn't matter how much time it took to bring them to life and create the places they call home.
Time, yes, time. Each double-page spread for my bed took Salley a month and a half to 2 months to create. After all 18 scenes were completed, they were sent off to be photographed for reproduction in the book. At this point, the publisher's production team took over, overseeing the design, printing, and marketing of the book. Then, the pieces of artwork were returned to Salley to have their next life as an exhibition set to travel to museums across the country. I asked Salley why she thought making art for children's books was so important.
Picture books are children's first introduction to art. And I want to give them something to connect with and care about. Grown-ups call attention to my techniques and perfect little stitches. But children respond directly to the emotional impact of the world I create with those little stitches.
There is something for all of us to experience, young and old, as we travel the world through the pages of this remarkable book.
Now we're gonna move on to Salley, and she has a slideshow she's gonna share with us. So when you're ready, Salley.
Okay, am I on?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Mary, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be. I don't really know where I see a lot of sunshine coming in windows, and it's wonderful to see your smiling faces. So welcome to my little wee world. And I also want to thank all of the people who have come to see my exhibit at the Brick Store Museum. It's wonderful to hear your responses. Seeing my work in person is a different experience, and that's really why I exhibit it. So because it's one thing to see things on the screen or in a book, in that way it reaches a lot of people, but to see it in person is a whole different experience. So today I'm going to share with you where my artwork came from and how it's developed over the years and why I do it. So to put it simply, needle is my tool and thread is my medium and stitches are my marks. So my work can be very adorable and sentimental and heartbreaking and satirical. I have illustrated a dozen children's books in my career and illustrated CD covers, including Peter and the Wolf by Maestro Classics. And early on in the 70s and 80s, I designed craft projects for women's magazines. And I had a line of stuffed pins, which I made by the hundreds. And I made baby bibs by the hundreds. And fairy kits by the thousands. I've written a how-to book, Felt We Folk, which is almost 20 years old. It's in its second edition. So many people have learned to make their own figures using this book. And my husband and I have also done stop motion animation. So where did this doll-infested needle and thread universe come from? Well, it started in the height of the baby boom in a family of introverts, including our parents. We were either making things or staring into space. And things haven't changed that much. Doll play was an important part of my childhood, and miniatures as well. And except for a few self-conscious years during my teenage years, I have managed to still play with them. This is the book that we were talking about earlier, which I made it around age 8. My mother kept it, God bless her. And I can remember making this and thinking, it's got to have something more in it. So I got out the stapler, which I loved. And I think that the staples are kind of a precursor to using a needle and thread later, if you want to analyze it. So in my teenage years and in high school, I continued to make things. I made a lot of my own clothing. But I loved art, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to art school. So I went to Syracuse University, which has a good art department. And there I learned, I did drawing realistically, but I also only wanted to take art classes. So it soon became apparent that I needed to go to an art school. So I transferred to the Rhode Island School of Design, where I continued to draw. I took illustration classes. I experimented with different styles, including trying to unlearn everything I had learned and draw like a child. In art history class, I routinely fell asleep when slide after slide of color field paintings came on the screen. And then Alexander Calder's work came up and I woke up. Finally, someone who does art for the joy of it, who expresses, it just explores new ways of working. He spoke to me. And I started making things three-dimensionally myself. All along, I had been making things on the side, thinking that it was separate from my artwork. Now I could combine them and feel okay about it. And I was encouraged by my illustration teacher, Judy Sue Goodwin Sturgis, to do that. And by my senior year, I did a thesis of the whole story of Hansel and Gretel, including this gingerbread house, which I made out of real dough and cooked in my little apartment oven. So that's Judy Sue in the middle at a recent trip to my studio. And on the left is children's book writer April Prince, who is her assistant. And she continues to be so supportive of and encouraging. She is the reason that I do what I do. We are very good friends. So in school, when I was still in art school, I made these pins and it was all my own little business and I sold them. But I also worked on them in class. So we would have these all-day critiques, which were interminable. And the only way I got through them was to bring something to work on. So I would be sitting there working and sewing these things, and Judy Sue saw them. She wondered what I was doing, and she just lit up and said, "You have to do this for your artwork. Do your assignments this way." So that was the turning point for me. And after I graduated, I continued to make these pins. I already had a business. I sold them wholesale. And I was kind of a keen business person. My mother had a shop, and I learned about how to present things and sell things through working in her shop. And I continued that I use those skills all the time, still today. At the same time, I was making a sculpture, soft sculpture, including this refrigerator, which is about 9 inches tall. And I did lots of appliances like this, and a series of housewife dolls. And I had shows of this work, and people really enjoyed it. They got a kick out of it. But I got the sense that the response was, it was fun, but it wasn't really seen as art. These were just dolls. And at about that point, I found out about 17th century English stump work, which is a form of raised embroidery. And I took that. So I'd only seen pictures in magazines or books, and I had never seen anything in real life, but I sort of took that concept and figured out a way of making something similar. I took these dolls, I made it flat on the back so it could be sewn to a background, and then they were put on a stretcher and in a frame and then hung on the wall. And I figured that if people could see that my work that way, they might even think it was art. So I continued to make these scenes, and taking things like these animals are the size of my pins. So the whole my pins actually evolved into being part of my larger art. And this Noah's Ark is in the show at the Brickstore Museum. I borrowed it from its owner, and there's a lot of older pieces in this first room that you enter in the museum. Now, this whole idea of making something on a background, I needed a name. People kept saying, "What is this that you do?" And the word stump work, I'd always had a problem with. It sounded too peculiar and arcane and even homely. So I had to come up with something. So I named this fabric relief. And so I had children and continued to make my art. And I was so prolific. I cannot believe it. And looking back at all the things I made, even with these two little kids. But life was simpler then. We didn't have cell phones or the internet. We didn't even have television. And all I did was take care of my kids, make dinner, and work on my art. And I made scenes, more kind of domestic, homey scenes, lots of landscapes. And always in the back of my mind was thinking, yeah, maybe I'll do a children's book at some point. But it took finding a writer. And so in my town on Cape Cod, it was a small town, but people always support each other and talk to each other. And I was introduced to Judy Richardson, who lived in the same town, and she was a children's book writer. And she showed me her story, The Way Home. I fell in love with it. And we collaborated on this book. We went to New York, we found an editor, and it took a while. It took 8 years between looking at the manuscript and having a published book. But here we are at the Barnstable County Fair with Bella the elephant in one of our publicity photos. I worked on the book for about 1.5 years in the evening after my kids went to bed. And over the next decade, I produced a book like about every other year, including Mary Had a Little Lamb, and a book of poetry called You and Me, and In the Heart, as well as others. And many of these, the illustrations for these books are in the exhibit at the Brickstore Museum. I was able to track down a lot of the pieces from their owners and borrowed them for the show. So this is the largest group that has come together since I made this book 30 years ago. So we have the Way Home and In the Heart, and Leanne is hanging things from You and Me there. And in the around late 90s, the fairies sort of invaded, and they dominated my working existence for about 10 years. It was wonderful. It's a wonderful experience living in this fairy world. And I could have built a fairy empire if I wanted to, but I realized that if I didn't get out of this soon, I would never leave. So I kind of made the decision to just make a clean sweep and discontinue my kits and move on. And so now that I had some time, I could work on these long projects, like making this self-portrait, the spiral timeline of my life, which took about 2 months. And if I had continued with my kit business, I was doing everything. I was designing, I was putting everything together, I was doing the marketing. If I hadn't given that up, I couldn't have moved on and to do this. And also do some more children's books. And so I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do that. But in this book came out 2010, Pocketful of Posies, which is an anthology of nursery rhymes. It took about 3 years to do the illustrations. It's a large book. And it won the Hornbook Award, which is a prestigious honor in the children's book community. I just felt, it was an amazing experience for me. I felt acknowledged by a community that I felt kind of on the outskirts of. I always felt that my work was too much on the fringe to be really accepted. So now I felt that what I was doing was legitimate, gave me more confidence. And part of the award was doing their magazine cover, which was so much fun. After I work on a body of work, a book in particular, there are a lot of scenes that need frames. And I'm lucky to have a multi-talented husband in Rob, who has been making frames for me for over 40 years. And my work is presented under glass so that it is protected from bugs and light and curious fingers as well. This is an exhibit of the illustrations from Pocketful of Posies, which at the time went around the country for about 5 years. And at the Brickstore Museum are several of these these pieces, which I was able to borrow. I've sold most of them, but got together, I don't know, maybe 20 pieces out of the 50. And I used that model for my new book, My Bed, to have an exhibit of the original art. I planned ahead for this and found places way ahead of time and got them on the schedule. And the Bedtime Stitches exhibit is about halfway through a 5-year tour. The next location is in Minnesota, and then it's going to be in Washington State after that. And you can see the exhibit schedule on my website. So in the Brickstore Museum is a room full of some of my bigger pieces. So big for me is 24 by 30 on the blue wall there. And these are pieces I've made over the last 10, 12 years. They're standalone. They are not used as illustrations. There's usually a theme. And one of the first ones I did was The Birds of Beebe Woods, which commemorates our town forest in Falmouth on Cape Cod. And I wanted to include animals from nature, something that actually one would see or hear in the forest. So I did some research and I found some of the most common birds in the area. And when I designed them, the birds, these are the first birds I've ever made. I wanted them to be realistic enough so that you could identify what kind of bird they were. But I also wanted them to be abstracted and patterned in a way that was fun to illustrate. And I went on to do some collections of other types with people. And this piece is called Facetime, which is kind of a family tree, but it's not anybody's family tree in particular. It's more like of humanity through time from long ago till present day. And each of these little figures is like a little cameo in a wreath. And I love doing the research on fashion and history. And I continue with that idea and made Cover Up, which is all women wearing some kind of a head covering or markings that signify the area that they come from, the religion, the time period, some kind of distinction that makes them stand out. And these women, I photographed them all before I put them in the piece and had them enlarged and put on the wall in the exhibit. And this is the first time I've ever tried that. I'm thinking everything I do is tiny, miniature, and you can't really see the detail sometimes. So if I blew it up, it's going to be seen in a totally different way. And so this has been a really fun aspect of the show and has become a popular photo op spot. Now, people have come to see my art as comforting and childlike over the years. And I love to do that kind of thing. But I also bring the real world occasionally into my art. With this piece, Displaced, I knew this was going to be a totally different kind of work when I envisioned it. So I thought of it as like an opera. It's like a scene, operatic scenery with a chorus winding its way through an ominous forest. And it was inspired by recent events, but it could represent the timeless plight of refugees throughout history. And I also have done some artwork which is strong and dark more recently. So people are surprised by that. And in my show at the Brickstore Museum is a gallery devoted to my political cartoons. It's called the Liberty and Justice Room. And these are photographs of scenes that were set up and photographed. So after the election, after the 2016 election, I was surrounded by people who were anxious and felt hopeless and helpless. And I thought, well, I'm not going to wring my hands. I am going to use my hands to express what I see unfolding around me. So I put together a troupe of actors called the Wee Folk Players, and they acted out scenes which we photographed in my dollhouse and in other settings for about six months. Rob and I would sit at dinner and think about what kind of a scene we wanted to make. And we put these out once a week on my blog. Here's one of them, which is inspired by Alice in Wonderland. And after we did that series, the natural evolution was to do a stop motion animation. And Rob and I had been thinking for years that we wanted to do that. But we finally had a story. And we used Hansel and Gretel as sort of the basics of this story, the structure of the story, Liberty and Justice. So we set up in the basement, and with the slider with the camera and the lights and the stage. And we worked there for a year filming the book. And I made the figures and the scenery and the props and did the animation. And Rob did photography and the lighting and the editing. So our film, Liberty and Justice, A Cautionary Tale in the Land of the Free, is available to see at the exhibit, but you can also watch it at home on YouTube. It's 13 minutes. And also in the exhibit are the characters that I made and some of the props to see. And there are also some figures that, like display case with, I don't know, there must be 100 of these little dolls in there. And they're mostly from my book, my how-to book, Felt We Folk, as samples. But hidden in there are some celebrities, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg and climate change activist Greta Thunberg, and Lincoln. Here he's listening to the tweeter-in-chief. So in the exhibit, there's quite a range that starts from my childhood to the present day. And in this first gallery at the straight ahead on the right are 3 scenes that are more recent, and they are a series of landscapes that I've been working on. I really felt a need somehow to get back to nature, to just dive in. So these scenes that I've been working on they're fanciful. They incorporate the real world, but also they're imagined. They're full of little figures, these little wee folk figures, which are about 1 inch tall. And there's places where they live as well. This is the winter scene, frosty morning. And I've made a spring scene, Mossy Glen, which has forsythia and lots of moss. So it takes about, or it has taken about 5 months to make these scenes. So these days, I can make maybe 2 pieces a year. And while I was working on it, Rob filmed me doing some of the steps. You know, people ask all the time to see me stitching. They just want to watch me stitching. And I told this to Rob, and he said, "What? People want to watch you stitching?" He's thinking that must be the most boring thing. But I said, well, let's just do a minute. We'll call them stitch minutes. So we put out a bunch of these, and people watch them over and over and over, and he's just amazed. The newest in this series is called Mossy Glen, and it's the autumn scene. So it's a cutaway with an above ground and below ground, with some very busy little wee folk harvesting and carrying their produce to this little doorway, and then it's brought down underneath the ground and stored. So I'm going to end with this little guy who, you know, as he's hiking forward, I kind of identify with him. I feel like I'm in a stage in my life and in my career where I'm still making things. I'm kind of slowing down. I'm moving a little more methodically, being very choosy about what I do, and but still moving forward. And I know that I will be making art as long as I can. Another question people have is, do I have any trouble with my hands and like arthritis? And I say, no, I have never had any pain in my hands, and hopefully that will continue. So I hope to be able to make things and sew things and share them with the world for many years to come. Well, thank you so much for listening to my story.
Thank you, Sally. I love seeing the range of your work. And we love I love seeing people come in and looking for your fairies. And,
Oh,
and
good.
I thought this would be a good point that we could go to questions for you. And I want to apologize again for the technical difficulties anyone had. If you missed anything, we are recording this and we will be sending you it straight to your inbox, so you'll be able to watch it. So if you have a question and you want to chat and you want me to ask it, you can type it in the chat box, or you can go to the bottom of your screen, and there's on the bottom right, there's a reactions option. And if you raise your hand, I'll go ahead and unmute you and you can ask Sally your question yourself. Oh, I have a new message. Are there any more children's books in the works, Sally?
Oh, I probably not. I have to be honest. Unless there's some extraordinary story that comes my way that I just cannot resist, I probably will not do another one. It's very time consuming. It takes over your life. It's at least 2 to 3 years of working solely on that project. And I've loved doing all of the children's books, but I just feel like I'm at the point where I feel a little more, I feel kind of selfish. It's sort of like, I just want to do what I want to do. And I feel like I'm old enough now, I can say that and get away with it. But probably not.
All right, I see Missy with her hand up, so I'm going to ask her.
Hi, Sally. Nice to meet you this way, and really wonderful to see all the presentation about your work. I've really enjoyed following your blog and really appreciated when you did the political work. I thought that was a great pivot in that moment and full of heart. So I appreciate that. And I've worked for years with stitching, but had to, I had to shift my direction. And part of it was in relation to something that happened in my life. And I've been thinking about going back to it. And I just wanted to say that seeing you and hearing you talk about all the fun that you have with it, was my experience of it also, is encouraging to me. And I think I'm going to put my foot back into that pond, or my fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Nice.
thank you.
That's so nice to hear. It's wonderful. But I hope you do it.
Yeah.
And stick with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Great.
have to figure out what the format is this time around, but yes.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sometimes having the desire is the start, and feeling a need and a push it's a start. But sometimes it's hard to know how to start. I do that when I'm just beginning something. I can be paralyzing.
Yeah.
And until I have a clear idea in my head, I can't start. It's not going to happen by doodling or just, I don't know, going for a run. Well, maybe run would help, or bike ride would help, sort of loosen things up. But it's got to be a clear idea, clear vision. That's how it works personally. That's how it works for me. And then the rest kind of unfolds. And I know that I've done it before, so I think I'm going to do it again. And I know that I can do it again. So and you may have had that experience too. You've done it before. You know that you can do it again, and it might be a little different. So you have to be open to that possibility that it's going to be different. But that can be really exciting too.
Yeah. Yep. It's true. I have lots of confidence in my abilities. It's just, what shape can it take that I can do this time around? So we'll find out.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna jump to a question in the chat box from Jan O'Sullivan. She wanted to know, how much embroidery floss do you go through a day or a week?
Oh, I don't know really. I don't really use that much thread. I have a bunch of them, bunch of skeins. I have this box with all these different colors in it, but I'm not constantly going and replenishing it. It's because my work is small, and I use single strands of embroidery floss a lot of times. So that's miles and miles of thread, but I really don't use that much. I don't know. I really have no answer for that.
I see Deborah's hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute, Deborah. There you go.
Hi, Sally. How are you?
Hi.
I just want to say, for me, who certainly has a touch of ADD, I'm an OT with children in the school system, and so many of the kids who don't do traditional learning and really find that anything with their hands, helps them express themselves and be who they are. And so your work has spoken to me on so many different levels. I'm a knitter and a felted wool addict. I have more, well, I probably don't have more than you have, but I do have quite a bit. But just the whole, and somehow I have this great memory of my mom hand stitching, just in a mending sort of way, but it's just this incredibly heartfelt feeling when I think of it. So seeing, and your miniatures, seeing every story of every piece that you've made, and also imagining the story behind it. I also wanted to ask, when you see items, does it come to you that, oh, that might work? Or when you're developing your ideas, which is more? Do you then have to go seek materials, beads, whatever to fill in the blanks? Like how does that work for you?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So I could never find something if I'm looking for it.
Yeah.
So especially in a store, a traditional store, or maybe even online. So a lot of the things I find are in nature, or they're in some junk drawer, or they are castaways. They aren't something that is sold as a craft supply. They are somehow out in the world. So what the things that I use, I have collected over the years. I have boxes and boxes of all kinds of unique things that probably will never make it into my art, but they are there in case.
Yeah.
And I feel for my children who will have all this stuff to go through. And so, but this is what it takes. So I'm a collector, and so yeah, when I see something, I sort of see some potential, but I'm not sure what it's going to be yet. But it has to have some way of sewing it onto something. So if it has holes in it, that's better. If it has some way of winding thread around it, that will work. It has to have some way of adhering to something else. And I hate glue, so I only use that when absolutely necessary. And it's just a nerve-wracking experience.
I think it's the curse and the blessing of a creative mind where you just see potential in everything. It's so dangerous to go to thrift or to yard sales or whatever and
Right.
try to restrict.
Yeah. Well, it gets to the point where now I have enough stuff. I don't need any more things.
No more stuff.
People I say, oh, I've got all this beautiful lace and all these buttons. And so I decided to just say no.
Just say no, no. Well, I've been twice to the exhibit and plan on going one more time before it's done. So
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really love
Great.
it.
Thank you.
All right, I have a few more questions for you in the chat box, Sally. So I have one, someone is wondering, so you use a lot of wire in your small pieces. So besides the lettering and characters, I'd like to know why you use it, like around the door frames and windows, etc.
Oh yeah. I think it's an aesthetic decision. It's sort of like an outline. It is a way of differentiating planes, almost. It's sort of like emphasizing. It's like when you're doing a drawing and you outline it again, or you outline it with color, or you put little squiggly things around it. You're emphasizing it. You're saying, you're zeroing in. This is important. This is like, so that's why I use the wire. It's as a decorative element, but it's also to, it makes it more interesting. It makes it so it's not all the same. Because if I use felt, if everything is felt, to me, that's boring. I need to have some other texture in there. That's why I use found objects. That's why I use beads and the wire. So the wire is covered with fabric, with thread. So that's a different texture than the felt. And so it's a way of adding interest. And it's like, it's especially if I'm using it in an architectural element, it just adds a little more of a 3D effect as well. So I hope that explains it.
And I see Jane with her hand up, so I'll ask her to unmute so she can ask you her question.
Hi, Sally.
Hi.
Hi. I'm a huge fan of 17th century stump work, and I just wondered, was it just a spark for you, or have you gone back later to look further into stump work and the history of the work?
Well, I have done more research on it and looked at more books and actually seen some at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And but I think that it really was a jumping off point for me. it was just seeing it saying, oh, you can do an embroidery and you can make it three-dimensional. You can make little figures. You can make it into a relief scene, a bas relief. And so that's its value to me. The stump work itself and the way that people do things, I am intrigued by. I just love to peer and look at all the little details and figure out how they did things. And I'm thinking they're so whimsical. And I think about the people making these things at the time and how much fun it must have been for them to do that. And what an idea. Like who thought of this originally? Who was or a group of people who started making that? Did these women get together? Did they share their ideas? So I have lots of questions about it.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely love your work. I have to say, for years I've studied stump work, and a lot of people try to replicate it. And I find your work far closer to the 17th century work and the essence of what it used to be, because you're not copying what they were doing. You've got your own style, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful. It's beautiful work.
Thank you. I think that these maybe what you're referring to is sort of the storytelling element that is in these scenes in the stump work. And these are characters. They have personalities that come through, and there's lots of animals, and it's juxtaposition of all these fanciful things all thrown together. And it's not just the technique, it's the composition, it's what they chose to add and put in. So in that way, that's the art of it.
Yeah, it's very beautiful work you do. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Sally, I'm going to read one question from the chat box, and then I'm going to let Laura ask her question for you. Helena wanted to know, she said, your work is so time consuming. Is it ever difficult to maintain your focus?
Oh, okay. Never. It's never hard to maintain my focus. I don't know what it is about it, but I am in such a heavenly place when I am doing my artwork. This is where I want to be. This is where I choose to be. It's kind of an escape. And so I don't lose my focus. It's like, my interest is held continuously. And people say, well, you're sitting there, do you watch television? Do you listen to books on tape? I mean, there's something else? And I'm thinking, I don't want any other stimulation. Maybe I'll listen to music, but I don't want to be listening to a story. I am working on my artwork, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it. It's not like just doing the same stitch over and over again. Every time I'm making something, I am planning on devising how to do it. I'm problem solving. It's very active. So in that way, it's maybe a little different than other needlework where you already have a grid and it's more color by numbers kind of filling in. Mm-hmm. With mine, I got all these parts, all these disparate parts, and I've got to figure out how to get them all together in the end. And every piece is new that way.
Thanks.
Hope that answered that.
All right, Laura, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Hi, Sally. I'm really happy to be here. I first saw your work like many, probably a couple decades ago at the Art Institute of Chicago, where you had an exhibit in the children's book area. Yes. And it was so inspiring and so encouraging to me as a textile artist that I want to thank you for doing what you do. And you're welcome. And I have two questions. One's real quick, and I could probably go to your website and figure it out. But where are you exhibiting your work in Minnesota?
It's in Moorhead, so it's up north.
Oh, it's up north then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, I like your Minnesota accent.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And the reason it's there because I have a huge fan who lives in the area, or Fargo. I'm not sure. I mean, it's right across the border.
Yeah.
And I've been there, and she's a member of the Embroiderers Guild of America, and she arranged to have this show. She contacted the museum and she said, "You've got to have this show." She made it happen. So that is why it is there. And there's a lot of people who do handwork and embroidery in the area. So that's where it is in Minnesota.
Oh, well, that would be worth the drive for me.
Oh, good. I hope you can get out there.
My second question is kind of personal, but I do a lot of stitching. And when I look at people on the screen here, I know that they're working with their hands. I can see some knitters and stitchers out there. Do you ever get tired of sitting on your butt? I mean, isn't it hard on you after a while? How do you deal with that?
Well, it definitely is a sedentary activity. It's the definition of sedentary activity. Yeah. And so I really work to balance that. So I go to an exercise class every morning. And so I do vigorous exercising, kickboxing and Zumba and all different kinds of stuff. And I bike ride. And I do that for an hour every day. And that way I'm moving. And it's actually kind of social because it's a class. So I'm as I explained, a total introvert. So I go to this class. I talk to people for about 10 minutes. Then we start the class. We do it for an hour. I'm actually doing something with other people, but we don't have to talk to each other. Then I leave, and that's enough for me. That's enough people for me. And it's like it's this perfect balance. And I have my exercise at the same time. So then I feel like I can sit on my butt for the rest of the day. It's okay.
Thank you for giving me permission. I really am grateful. Nice seeing you. Thank you for your presentation.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah.
So if it's all right with you, Sally, I have about 3 more questions in the box.
Sure.
And we could finish those up.
Yeah.
Okay. So where was it? Someone wanted to know, okay, here it is. Karen Holt was asking, can we still get your older children's books? They have My Bed and Pocket Full of Posies, but would still love to obtain the other ones.
Well, no, that's very nice. And I wish I could say it's easy, but I mean, it is possible. You can buy them used. Amazon has a way of getting used books, and library copies, sometimes they offer, but that's really the only way of getting them, unfortunately. All my early books are out of print. And now I wish I could, bring them back to print, but that's kind of a miracle. Children's books are very short-lived. And so I feel quite blessed to have 2 children's books in print still. Yeah. And Pocket Full of Posies has been in print for 12 years, which is the most my books have ever been in print. And I think that it will be for a while. So that's the answer to that.
This question's coming from Blanca Maria, and she wanted to thank you because your presentation is so inspiring. And her question is, do you have a professional studio who photograph your work, or do you do it yourself?
Well, I have an in-house photographer, my husband, Rob. So although this is not his profession, he is good enough to be a professional. And I'm really lucky. So he takes the photographs. We have a whole setup in the basement with lights, and he has a great camera, and he knows everything about photography. So if I didn't have him, I would hire a pro. I mean, I I
He
do
does
a lot
great
of my
work.
own pictures just to share on Instagram and stuff, just on my phone, and you can get some really good pictures that way. But if you're going to do something that you want to really have of your artwork and you want to present it the best possible way, you have to hire a professional.
And then I have a question. Are you a fast stitcher?
Some people say yes. I don't really know. I think I'm pretty methodical. I can move through things pretty fast, but it's not all about speed for me. I'm not trying to do it fast. It's just if I get into the groove or the rhythm, yeah, I can whip it up. But so I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know how to compare myself to other people because I don't see other people stitching, so I don't know.
Thanks. All right, our last question is from Julie Goot, and it says, do you work on your art each day? If so, how many hours a day? And is it hard to find patience when you are working on such tiny pieces? Your artwork is amazing.
Well, thank you, Julie. I try to be in my studio sometime every day. I just don't feel right unless I am. So I kind of need a studio fix every day. Some days I can be in here all day, other days no. So it all depends on what's going on in my life. And I do a lot of other things to support my art. Like online, I write a blog and I put things out on Instagram and Facebook. So I'm always thinking about that and planning things, promoting my work. I have a lot of shows coming up, so I have to meet with people and figure out what's going to happen. And then also arranging this exhibit at the Brickstore Museum, I had to contact people and go pick up their art and assure them that everything's going to be safe and that I'll take good care of it. And then when the show's over, I have to return the pieces to these people. So there's all this other stuff that goes on. I'd say it's probably 50% of my time is sort of supportive stuff that you do, not just the artwork. And every artist I talk to would say the same thing. If you want to have your art out there in the world, that's kind of what you have to do. I mean, if you just want to make art for yourself, and that's perfectly fine, and just do it and spend time doing it, then it can be a very satisfying life as well. And I don't know was there another question in there? Or is that it?
Got it.
Okay.
All right, well, I wanted to just thank you again, Salley. This has been so inspiring, and we're so happy to have your exhibit here at the Brickstore Museum. And thank you to everyone that came today and listen, and keep your eyes on your inbox because we have recorded this and we will be sending it out to you. So thank you again, Salley.
Well, thanks. It was my pleasure. And thank you everyone who's come along for the visit.
All right. Bye.